I think I don't need to say who he is. Everyone knows who he is. He's one of the people that I've come across since the Gaza conflict has started. And since the conflict has started, there are people who I've listened to and people who've made sense. And I came across Elijah, and I'm sure every single other person watching me already follows him. So I'm not going to go too much into that. But Elijah has been kind enough to accept my request to join me for a live broadcast and a podcast that will be going onto Spotify and to all the other platforms that I share this to. So with that in mind, Elijah, I just wanted to say thank you very much for coming. And I wanted to, if we can, just jump straight in, if we can. And I wanted to know what your thoughts are on, and I've got a set of questions, but the most important one for me right now is the one to do with Gaza. And it's to do with the fact the Americans have rejected the reconstruction plan that Egypt has put in place. It's a comprehensive $56 billion rebuild of Gaza. Can you tell me, first of all, what you think of the rejection and why you think America's doing what it's doing? And just tell me what your thoughts are on the whole of that project part of things and where we're going with Gaza, you think, in your opinion.
Actually, Gaza is a bit complicated today because the Americans came up with a plan. They want all the Gazan out. President Trump wants to rebuild a kind of Riviera, not taking into consideration the people who were born there, were the ancestors, the owners of the land. But this is not going to happen. And on the other hand, we have the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who's struggling to keep his head afloat. He knows the moment he announced the passage from phase one to phase two, which is the total withdrawal of the Israeli forces from all of Gaza, at the exception of a kind of buffer zone, then his government is going to collapse. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, who has at least six members of the Knesset, making Netanyahu, giving him the majority, is the one who is threatening Netanyahu to pull out. And without him, then Netanyahu will lose the number needed in the Knesset, above 62, to keep himself as a prime minister, and will have to call for an early election. He knows that he's going to fail in the early elections. He knows that there is a lot of pressure on him, and this is why he doesn't want to let go. By not letting go, what he's proposing is to extend phase one and not to move to phase two. And because he is a very intelligent and shrewd person, he's kind of manipulating the American envoy and the American administration by saying, well, I accept what you are proposing. And what the Americans are proposing is to release all the prisoners, the Israeli prisoners, in one go, or at least all those who are alive. This is not going to happen again because the Palestinians will be totally exposed, no guarantee whatsoever, as the Americans and the Israelis are continuously changing their mind, not respecting the ceasefire. The phase one has not been respected, at least in the humanitarian protocol, where not enough tents and houses, prefabricated and prepared houses have not been supplied to Gaza, including not enough gasoline, not enough trucks for humanitarian support. Basically, the phase one has not been respected, and Netanyahu wants immediately to jump to the extension of phase one, ignoring the main points that were agreed upon in the ceasefire and saying, I agree what the American envoy is saying. Now, he doesn't want to go immediately to war because this is not something that the Americans have agreed upon. What he wants is to get back more prisoners. He considered that there are 50 plus, of which at least 27, 28, 29 of his prisoners who are still alive, and the others have been killed by the Israelis during this war. And
Yes.
what he wants is to obtain the release of all those who are still alive and
Mm-hmm.
then regain the hostility, regain the war. he will find 100 excuse to do so. This is where we are at. The Palestinians are very much aware that if they accept the extension of phase one, it means they certainly going toward a war because Netanyahu wants to stay in power until November 2026, the date of the new elections in Israel. And for that, Gaza is going to suffer further. He has ceased all the supply of humanitarian aid, and the Americans are not saying anything. The European, the West, the whole world is saying nothing about it. That's a war crime, crime against humanity. Now, the Egyptian plan to reconstruct Gaza is not feasible because there is no deal yet, because the Arabs don't have a weight, because they have exerted no power whatsoever, either on the Americans or on the Israelis or anyone in the world that has a little bit of influence over the Israelis. Therefore, the Arabs can meet and talk and decide whatever they want. But if the Americans want the Palestinians out and Netanyahu doesn't want to stop the war and wants to exchange phase one so he can destroy as much of what remained of Gaza, then there is no deal. And the only way is for the Palestinians to hold their ground, not to allow more release of Israeli prisoners, and wait until the Americans are convinced that perhaps going to phase two is maybe the only option left.
When and can you tell me just specifically when you say the Arabs, who do you mean by the Arabs? Do you mean just the Khaliji Arabs, or do you mean the whole of the Arab League? Who are the people who are? Well, we know who has done nothing, and we know who has done something. So just explain a little bit about the Arabs and why they're not willing to engage. Why is it that it seems to me like the only people who are properly getting involved are the Lebanese, were the Syrians, were the Yemenis, and the Iraqis as well. But and this was and still is the axis of resistance. So tell me about the Arabs and what's holding them back. Why are they unable to do that? What are the constraints on them? I need to understand that.
Well, first of all, there are no Arabs in the term of a united nation that stand together with one opinion and one position. We have, starting with Egypt, the most important country on the borders with Gaza. Egypt, without the agreement between Israel and Egypt, the Israelis cannot deploy the forces they have already in the Philadelphia corridor, the 14 kilometers separated, not Israel, but Gaza and Egypt. This is where the Israelis have heavy forces deployed on that corridor. And in 1978 agreement between the Egyptian and the Israelis, Israel doesn't have the right to keep these forces, doesn't have the right to fly with its jet and helicopters above the area and operate against any force or anyone in
Okay.
the area. The presence of the Israeli for many months conducting such an operation in Gaza through the Philadelphia corridor, occupying the Philadelphia corridor, doesn't come without the agreement of Egypt. Therefore, Egypt cannot really do a lot because we have seen its position of being very silenced about what's happening to the Palestinian. The only other country is Saudi Arabia. But again, Egypt and Saudi Arabia consider the Muslim Brotherhoods as terrorist groups, and
Yes.
they consider Hamas as terrorist groups. Therefore, Saudi Arabia, the only leverage that it has is to tell the Americans, I will not accept any solution without a two-state solution for Gaza. Now, again, this is not on the table today. First, because the Israelis, Knesset, abolished completely the possibility
Yeah.
of two-state solutions. And with 97 votes of 120 Knesset members, uh, Netanyahu obtained what he wanted. Nobody is talking about two-state solutions today. Secondly, uh, the plan for after Gaza doesn't exist. So what Hamas is asking is saying, well, I accept to conduct elections in Gaza, and any party, any group can win. And if the Palestinian Authority can win seat, it's most welcome. uh, Hamas agreed to share Gaza and not to be a strip only for Hamas as the result of the election in 2005 that the West called upon and insisted upon.
Yeah,
And then Hamas won, and then immediately no one recognized it. So now, after this war, Hamas has a more pragmatic approach and saying, I'm ready to go for the elections. But to go for the elections, there are things that represent a priority before that. Who's going to reconstruct Gaza? Who's going to shelter the Gazan with a tent, with a small prefabricated houses?
yeah,
All these are lacking. If the Israelis are closing the tap on the humanitarian aids for 3 days now, who's going to feed the Palestinian in Gaza? So there are so many questions here that nobody can answer because the power is in the hand of the Israelis given by the Americans. And the Arabs are really spineless in this
yes,
situation. And they don't show any intention apart from the meeting and talking, but no practical measures will be taken. The king of Jordan will say always and will always repeat, I will do what is best for my people.
yeah,
And that's really very elastic. The best for his people can do anything that is imposed upon him by the Americans.
yeah.
That for him is the best for his people, but not for the Palestinian people. So, unfortunately, there is very little consideration to what the Arabs can do for Palestine.
I wanted to uh, do a quick segue if we can. So I saw a picture of Mahmoud Abbas meeting up because you were talking about the Palestinian Authority, and they were meeting up with the Syrian leadership of the HTS. And I don't know if you've seen it or not, but there was a video that was out that showed the Israeli flag and the new Syrian Republic flag. Well, it's not a republic anymore, but the new Syrian flag, which has changed color with the three stars in it. And it was a meeting between Israel and this new Syrian government. Now, I have in England been calling out for people not to accept this group of people to come in and be welcomed as the new leaders of Syria. You know, personally, when it comes to Bashar al-Assad and the regime before then, I don't believe in any dictatorship. I'm a Democrat. I'm a believer in democracy and all of that entails. Now, I understand there's people who just hate Alawites, hate Shiites, hate Sunnis, hate each other and whatever else. But what are your thoughts on the Palestinian Authority meeting up with this new organization and how this new organization has seen Syria just ripped to pieces? I've seen the northwest of Syria be given to Turkey. The northeast of Syria is already belonging to the Kurds. The Americans own some part of it because they've never left. And now the question of the Druze that have suddenly arrived as a new nation, as a new race, as a new player. What are your thoughts on this new player, Druze, which is going to be taking all the land south of Damascus? And I know in my heart of hearts they're not fighting for Drusedom, whatever that is. They're basically the tools of Israel. I want to know what are your thoughts on that and what's happened to Syria since this revolution of theirs that took place, and what are we supposed to think of Syria as a nation now? And is it a nation now, or is it just an occupied state, much like the rest of the Golan Heights? What are your thoughts on those Palestinian, Mahmoud Abbas, meeting them, and where we are with Syria today?
For Mahmoud Abbas to meet Israelis or pro Israelis or Syrian or other Arabs carrying an Israeli flag is not important for him because he meets with the Israelis. on a regular basis, and the Palestinian Authority has an agreement, a security agreement of full cooperation on the security level with the Israelis, where they imprison, they torture, they arrest Palestinian resistance group in the zone that is under the Palestinian Authority, but under the control of Israel, and nothing of the Palestinian Authority is really in the West Bank. That's one point. Secondly, is Abu Muhammad al Julani, the new president of Syria, stated from the first beginning he doesn't have a problem with the Israelis. And all his people said that they don't have a problem with Israel. The problem is the other way around. The Israelis have a problem with HTS, not because they consider HTS a terrorist group. On the contrary, Israel looked after this group in the past during 2011 to 2024. In the south, they offered medical support, intelligence support, some salaries, and even allowed evacuation of many Syrians before the control of the Syrian government forces under Bashar al Assad of the south. They allow a passage of many buses through Israel. So this is not something new. However, for the Israelis, it's important to keep saying that they consider this as a hostile and an enemy state because Israel wants to divide Syria and wants to continue justifying its presence in the three provinces that is occupying. We're talking about Suwaida, Quneitra, and Daraa. And also, that fits perfectly well with the Americans who are considering HTS as a terrorist group because the Americans want to stay in the northeast. And for now, they have the south and the northeast divided. So, dividing Syria in this way, we're talking about more than 35, 36% of Syria completely divided outside the control of the current Syrian government. And this is in disagreement with the interest of Turkey, with the interest of Iraq, and with the interest of Lebanon. Even Hezbollah would like to see Syria united because any division or any flirtation relationship between the Druze and the Israeli, and we're talking about the Druze of the Soeda and the southern Damascus, it may reflect badly on the long term of the Druze in Lebanon. Also, the partition of Syria can reflect badly on Iraq because then we will have the old Joe Biden plan that he said in 2005 when he was vice president: Sunnistan, Kurdistan, and Shiistan. So dividing Syria is really only in the interest of the Israelis and not in the interest of any other country around Syria. Now, why Israel is doing so? Because Netanyahu needs to stay in power. So he's looking for wars. And when he consider Israel, Syria as an enemy, but there's nobody in Syria who's fighting back. And when he said, for example, today in the crossover on handover between the Israeli chief of staff, the old one and the new one, he said Israel is fighting on seven fronts. Where are the seven fronts? There are no more fronts for Israel to fight upon. He wants to reinvent the war in Gaza. That's one front. In the West Bank, he is the one who's sending troops, and he is the one who's attacking the Palestinians, destroying their home. That's the second front. With Lebanon, the Lebanese Hezbollah decided not to attack or retaliate, giving the Lebanese government the possibility to do whatever they promised to do. That's a third front. Syria, Israel destroyed all its military capability and occupied three provinces, and it's around 27 kilometers away from Damascus. That's another front. Yemen stopped the attack because Yemen said, as long as the humanitarian support going into Gaza, I don't have the need to stop any shipment from the Red Sea. That's another front that's gone. And Iran is saying, giving an opportunity to the new US administration, waiting if something can be done. and there is no one firing against Israel today from Iran. And on the Iraqi front, the Iraq resistance stopped long ago from engaging into the war against Israel. So there are no more fronts. So what the are doing today under this far right, the most extremist government ever in the history of Israel, is to invent an imaginary enemy for Netanyahu to avoid an investigation committee and to avoid calling for early elections. This is where we are at today.
I can't. I don't think I've ever heard anyone call it Shiistan, Sunnistan, and Kurdistan. That is a perfect analogy of what it is, and it goes back to the old Roman adage of Caesar of divide and conquer. And again, this takes us to segue into Lebanon. I want to talk about Lebanon if we can. Is like just divide and conquer. I'm watching Sunni HTS people going on about how they want to murder Shia, this, that, and the other, while their country is being divided up and gobbled up. The only thing they've got going for them is we want to kill Shia people. And the conversation of just killing Shia people is the only offer they've got. Now, why would a government that is watching its country get occupied by all these different various Turkey, America, Kurds, and the Israelis, and now the Druze as the Israelis, the only focus that these people have got is how they're going to go and drink the blood of Shia people in Lebanon. And literally, so I've got a friend of mine called Hussein Maki, who is a religious person, he's a religious cleric. And I read his tweet. He said, their country has been taken over by everyone, and the only thing they can think of is to kill Shia. So I get what you're saying, and the other interesting thing that you said to me was about the various types of Druze areas. When we talk about Lebanon in a minute, can you tell me if those Druze are the same kind of Druze, or are they different types of Druze? Are they the same kind of affiliated tribes, these people? What is the situation in Lebanon today? And my question, answer those things for me. Then I want to talk to you about Hezbollah, and I want to talk about Lebanon if I can. If you can just tell me a little bit about what I just said now, I'd be grateful.
So the political leader of the Druze is Wali Jublat, the Lebanese Druze leader, who has enough influence on the Druze in Syria.
Right.
And the community in Syria, the Druze community in Suwaida, has been in harmony with his recommendations. He has visited them several times, even if he was anti Bashar Assad, and he kept this kind of relationship and influence over the Druze in Syria, and for that they refer back to him. Now, there are Druze in the Golan Heights, the occupied Golan Heights. There are Druze who not particularly stand with Israel, but they have an Israeli ID, and they join the army and they join the police forces.
Yeah.
It's really very not really clear where do they stand there, because yes, their territory has been annexed by force and given by Donald Trump to the Israelis. However, they are part of the Israeli system, and the Druze in Soeda, until now, they feel stronger because they feel there is someone defending them or standing behind them, but defending them against who? This current Syrian authority did not threaten the Druze and is not acting against the Druze, is of course acting against the Alawite in the north, and is considering the Alawite more as an enemy because they are the supporters of Bashar al-Assad, and they were the supporters of Bashar al-Assad. Nevertheless, nobody is threatening the Druze. And for the Israeli to say Dara, they are Sunni. And for the Israelis to say Kunaitra, Dara, and Suwaida, and we will protect the Druze, it's just trying to divide and conquer, or at least insinuate to the Druze that if you ever think of uprising and want to join me, you are most welcome and we will receive you. By the the pace Benjamin Netanyahu is going now, he can easily annex Dara, Konaitra, and Sueda without a problem because he has destroyed all the military capability that belonged to the Syrian army. And the current authority that had dismantled the Syrian army doesn't have the mean to stand against Israel, but doesn't have even the will or the intention to confront Israel.
Let me ask you a question just on that thing. Is there a sense of national identity for Druze as a Druze nation? And does that supersede its national identity towards Syria? And is it something that's sellable as a national identity of Druze under Israel? Are these people, because I know as a British Iranian, I love Britain and I love Iran, and I have a total sense of identity about being British, loving cricket, rugby, and whatever else. And I love Iran for chola kebab and whatever else. And I've got a sense of national identity. But for these Druze that are in Israel, or not in Israel, in Syria, do they not have any sense of identity of being a part of the Syrian, psyche of being, I am a Syrian? Or do they just go, well, we're Druze, we don't want to be anything to do with Syria or anything to do with it? And are they happy to go, for instance? Do you reckon if there was a plebiscite, and a vote for them, a referendum, they'd turn around and choose to go with Israel or not? That is an important thing, because if that's the will of the people, it is what it is. What are your thoughts on that?
The Druze have a sense of identity. They are Arabs. They will always remain as such. They've never denied being Arab Druze. And the Israelis embrace them as Arab Druze within the Israeli government, with the Israeli army and the police. However, they're very pragmatic people. If one watches the policy of Walid Jumblat, their political leader, he's someone who changes alliances depending on the interest of what he consider that support the existence of the Muwahideen Druze. Therefore, uh, th- being an Arab doesn't prevent them from being part of Israel when they have this choice only, and they don't have a choice to remain as Syrians. But the Druze in Sueda, for example, declared that they will not lay down the arms unless they see a full government in Damascus in place. And it's not happening yet. So we don't know what's going to happen next. We don't know if the Israelis are going to keep their control on Sueda. And if they do, and Sueda becomes part of Israel as the Golan Heights occupied, then most probably they will adapt. They will take all the infrastructure and services that Israel can offer to them, and then they will keep calling themselves, we are Syrian Arab Druze, as the one of the Golan Heights, but they will enjoy the facilities offered by Israel.
And would you reckon that would be because I remember that reading and seeing the divisions that took place when the Golan Heights was taken, with Druze families calling out to each other across long distances to cousins and uncles. Do you reckon that's something that they'd want to do?
No, they still do it in Majd al-Shams. They still do it in the Golan Heights. They still communicate through barriers, but doesn't mean they will not join Israel if these barriers are put at the limit of Suwaida, but on the borders on the road to Damascus rather than where it is today. Well, it depends on the Israelis, and I don't think there is any reason for Israel today not to annex the three provinces in the south, because nobody is stopping Israel, neither the international laws nor any other force or outside force or United Nations or Europe or United States. Therefore, today Israel has a free hand to do whatever it wants. And Donald Trump said to Benjamin Netanyahu, do what you want. And this is what he's doing. He's doing what he wants.
Right. We're gonna come to Donald Trump in a minute. What I want to ask you, if we can, is if we can go to Lebanon at the moment. So we know that Israel, through its pager attack and through its overwhelming use of bombing across southern Lebanon, across mostly southern Beirut, destroyed property, destroyed buildings, killed thousands of people. And they destroyed a lot of the commanders and leadership. I remember George telling me, Hoz, I can't believe it, that like 12 of the top 13 commanders or something all met in a flat and that building got annihilated. Said Hassan Nasrallah, the martyr, may he rest in peace, was killed. His deputy was killed. All of these things happened to Hezbollah. Where is Hezbollah today? How is it functioning? And also, did they do what they did because they didn't want to see a civil war in Lebanon? Because did they think that the amount of destruction that's being brought to bear on Lebanon is going to divide the country up? Even though most of the bombing was done in the Janub, in the south, and was targeting the Shia people, the Shia Muslims, and or maybe I'm wrong in saying it's saying the Shia people because I don't know the ins and outs of everywhere that was bombed. What are your thoughts on the comments I've just made on Hezbollah and also on Lebanon and potential civil strife that could have taken place because Hezbollah was engaging in this conflict, which really they didn't have to be involved in, but they chose to be as a matter of honor in supporting the Palestinian people because that's the way Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah has always been. What are your thoughts on what I've just said?
The world, and in particular the Middle East, will never forget that there are people in Lebanon with the means they had supported Palestine when the entire world pulled back and left Palestine on its own. And the sacrifices of the Lebanese people will be heard throughout the decades of how these people accepted the killing of their leaders and many of their commanders because they joined the battle to support the Palestinians. Having said that, the damage that Hezbollah has received is major, and that is allowing now, with the new government, space for the government to do what it has promised to do. First, the reconstruction. Second, to free all the Lebanese territories. This is what the president and the prime minister, the new prime minister, supported and elected and promoted by the Americans, promised to do, and to not only reconstruct and free all the land, but also free all the Lebanese hostages that were taken by the Israelis, because there are many hostages that have been taken by the Israeli occupation forces.
Right.
Therefore, Hezbollah will not interfere at the moment, doesn't have the intention to do so, because it's important to allow the government to take up its role and show its capability or incapability of doing what the government has promised to do. Now, why all that happened? We know the story. We know that Hezbollah decided to support the Palestinian cause, and knowing the cost, did not hesitate to
Yes.
offer all these sacrifices because of the Palestinian cause. We're not talking about a particular group of resistance. We're talking about the Israeli annihilating a Palestinian people, a population, killing children, women, elderly, destroying homes, destroying businesses, schools, churches, and mosques, destroying everything. So this is why the people of Lebanon, or at least those in the south of Lebanon and the Bekaa Valley, stood with Palestine. The price was very heavy. There were many mistakes, as one of the Hezbollah officials said a few days ago over the television, and Hezbollah is learning from these mistakes now. Going toward the civil war, I highly doubt that there is any direction to go toward a civil war today. There's no point. There are no elements on the ground. Nobody is going to stand against anybody else. Hezbollah is still strong enough to sustain a war internally or externally. But its objective has changed. It is no longer a regional army, but it's a domestic resistance. And Israel is occupying more Lebanese territories. That will give enough reason for Hezbollah to fight back and show its strength if Israel keep controlling these territory in the next year and a half or 2 years.
Do you think that the positions they've taken are positions that they're going to give up, and or do you think that's just going to be a position where they've said we're staying and that's it, and there's nothing you can do about it other than go to war with us and start up another conflict? And does Hezbollah have the appetite, and does, more importantly, the Lebanese army and the Lebanese people have the appetite to turn around and say to Hezbollah, you've got our support to remove these places? And those places, I'm assuming, are strategically high places that allow them to look upon the parts of Lebanon that they want to basically be able to take, well, be able to shoot at, to be able to control, and to be able to use as highly defensive places. Are those places important enough? Because I know in 2006, when Hezbollah removed the Israelis, they removed them from everywhere apart from the farm area. And is it important enough? Is it an important enough matter for the whole of the Lebanese nation to do that? And would they support Hezbollah in doing that? And is there a time frame for this whole situation for these 5 military outposts? And how big are these military outposts? I know, like, the American embassy is the size of a planet. What is this? What are these military outposts size-wise? Are they taking up a lot of farmland? Are they taking up a lot of, if you can just give me a bit more detail about that, I'd be grateful.
Well, first of all, the Lebanese government said that it stands by the 1701 United Nations Security Council resolution. This is enough to give Hezbollah the reason to fight Israel if Israel keeps the control and the occupation of Lebanese territory, if the government is incapable of uh, pushing Israel out by diplomatic and political means. Now, is that going to be approved by the Lebanese army and the Lebanese government? Of course not, because they are the ones supported by the Americans. The Lebanese government will not dare to stand against America. The Lebanese army doesn't have the capability to fight any war or to protect the country. I can add to that the Americans forced the Lebanese army to destroy any weapons found left by Hezbollah in the south of Lebanon and not to keep for the Lebanese army to use one day against Israel, because they are afraid. They don't want the Lebanese army to be armed with weapons that can represent a danger to Israel. So the Lebanese army is incapable of defending Lebanon. The Lebanese army has suffered many casualties during the war, not by being part of the war, but by sitting statically in its caserm and its barracks, doing nothing. This is why the casualties are registered, because the Israelis attacked these barracks, launched bombs against these barracks, and killed members of the Lebanese army that were not engaged in any war or any defensive position against the Israelis, even if this is their right and their duty. An army duty is to defend the borders, but not the Lebanese army. Now, is Hezbollah going to ask permission to do so or wait for the approval? Of course not. When the Lebanese government will show its incapability to defend Lebanon, then every single population on earth has the right to fall back to the Charter 51 of the United Nations of self defense given by any people around the world, including the Lebanese. So there is no need really for a statement by the Lebanese government to give the resistance the legitimacy to fight against the occupation forces when the United Nations and the international laws offer that to any people around the world that suffer from the occupation, including the armed resistance. What is valid for South Africa and other part of the world is
Mm.
valid also for Lebanon and the Palestinians of self-determination and self-defense. So how the Lebanese are going to take that? At the end of the day, the Lebanese in the south of Lebanon are the one who's going to suffer the consequences. But for now, nothing is going to happen because still the Israeli settlers did not return to their area of occupation. The businesses are not back in place. The destroyed 70% of the northern Israel has been destroyed by Hezbollah. So there is no reconstruction. Schools have not been reconstructed. At least 64,000 Israelis said they will never return to the north. Therefore, everything that Israel is doing today are signals for the settlers to return and say, we can protect you. But settlers are not buying that because Netanyahu failed to protect the Israelis. The army failed to protect the Israelis on the 7th of October and for 11 and a half months after the 7th of October when Hezbollah opened fire against the
Yeah.
Israelis. Now, are the position occupied by Israel important? Of course not, even if they are high ground. But today, with the drones and with jets, everything can be done without a static position that becomes vulnerable in case it is attacked by drone from a distance when the time comes for Hezbollah to retaliate. So the more land is the Israelis are occupying in Lebanon, the better it is for the resistance, in particular if Israel insists of not pulling out.
It's fantastic news. I want to ask you one other thing about Israel, and then we want to pivot to Iran, if I may. What do you make of the economic position of the Israel at the moment? What do you think of their economy? Where do you think this war footing they're on? I mean, America's just given them another 8 billion, I think, is what Marco Rubio has just given them. What are your thoughts on the Israeli economy and the people, their mood and I'm talking about the willingness of the people of Israel to be at war, and how's that going for them? Where are the what is the average Israeli at the moment mentally and economically, and as a nation state economically, where are they since the war started and where we are today?
One of the main issues that hit the Israeli society are the reservists who were forced to leave their job and join the army. Now, Israel has 180,000 professional soldiers and between 350 and 400,000 reservists. Calling upon all these reservists to join the war
Mm.
showed the incapability of Israel to fight on its own. This is why NATO, in particular the United States, Germany, and UK, joined the war by playing intelligence information, covering the sea, monitoring the sea, etc. The attacks on many positions in Lebanon could not have been done by Israel on its own, in particular during the end of the month of September 2024, because Israel did not have and still doesn't have the capability of carrying out uh, uh, hundreds of air attack in one day. So inevitably, NATO was part of this war. Now, why I'm saying that is because for the same reason, I will tell you that on the handover between the chief of staff today in Israel, there was also the commander, the US commander, Corella of the CENTCOM, the Central Command. And why the chief of the US Central Command needs to attend such a ceremony? Because of the close collaboration with the Israelis. So the collaboration is not only on the military side, but also on the economic side. Since Trump is in power, he offered the Israelis $12 billion. This is why Israel doesn't have really an economic problem in using all the weapons needed. 35,000 bombs were released by Donald Trump as soon as he arrived. Why? Why the Israelis need 50 F-15s, the strategic plane that can hit targets like in Yemen or Iran, when Israel is so tiny that the French ambassador in the UK under Jacques Chirac said that's a little small shitty place. These are his words, not mine. uh, and needs so many jets and so many planes, so many military support, so many tens of billions of dollars uh, to survive. It's because Israel is part of the United States. Therefore, the economy in Israel, as in any other place in the world, would tremendously suffer in a war. Russia, in the last 3 years, suffered more than $350 billion with such a strong economy and such a huge reserve of natural resources. And yet, Israel suffered what, 30, 40, 50, 60 billions, 100 billion? But then we don't see the worry from the Israeli side. We see the worry in the Israeli businesses because people were called upon the army to join the army. But on the long term, America is ready to cover that, is ready to support Israel. The whole West is ready to offer loans for Israel. The Israeli made even bank um, uh, facilities for all the companies around the world to buy the Israeli bonds. For the first time, they open up, and there will be billionaires who will buy that and support Israel to support their economy.
Yes.
Therefore, I think when you have Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister in Israel, open up and constructing, confiscating more land in the West Bank and around Jerusalem, and constructing more houses to violate the Palestinian territory with the money that, in theory, Israel is supposed not to have, it means that this government is really not very concerned about the economy.
You've covered everything for me. I want to try and do this in an hour. We've got 13 minutes. We can go longer if you want. I'm more than happy to have you go as long as you want. I want to talk about Iran at the moment, and the situation is that we've had a huge military buildup by the Americans into the area. B-52 bombers were flying above Gaza, low level, even though they're stratosphere, like, they're bombers that fly at the top of the heavens. They were flying low enough so that people in Gaza can see them. Do you reckon this is a show of force? And what would be the consequences of all of this buildup pivoting towards Iran? And what would you say? And you know as well as I know that last couple of days, the Iranian former foreign minister, Javid, I can't remember his name, has resigned from his position as the vice president to Pezeshkian. And they've had a position of talking to the West and trying to resolve problems with the West, and he's just gone. Where is Iran in this situation here? Where do we expect Iran? Is True Promise 3 going to happen? When does the line end for Iran waiting for the situation to be resolved? And is Iran now in the crosshairs of America and Israel? And are the consequences of what they've done in support of the resistance time for the plan that was, seven countries in 5 years is now the time for Iran, for America and Israel to do what they've got to do, which is try and take down Iran. What are your thoughts on that whole Iranian situation and the Iranian side of things? And where do we go from here as Iranians and people who are interested in seeing peace in the world and not having the whole world burn?
Now, not only the finance minister of Iran was removed because he did not receive the support of the parliament, but also Jawad Zarif, the vice president, resigned and went back to university as he was advised to do. President Mahmoud Pezeshkian said that, sorry, uh, that he wants to open up to America, and the leader of the revolution, the Wali Faqih, Sayyid Ali Khamenei, said no. What Sayyid Ali Khamenei wants is a constructive meeting. So far, the Americans are offering none. In the last meeting in Vienna and around the JCPOA and the nuclear deal, the Europeans, in particular Josep Borrell, that has resigned now at the end of his term, before that, he was involved in the discussion and he himself said what Iran is offering as a request of guarantee is legitimate and reasonable. Antony Blinken, Secretary of State at the time, said no, we reject that. Therefore, the Iranian today leadership wants something tangible. They
Mm,
don't want to take pictures with the Americans. The Americans are not offering to lift the sanctions on Iran. Soon, if the war ends in Ukraine, the 16,500 sanctions on Russia will gradually be removed, and Iran will remain the first country with the most sanctions around the world. For what reason? Iran did not engage in any hostile activity against the Americans. On the contrary, the Americans and the Israelis are doing that all the time. So Iran has also learned from the mistakes during the war, in the last war in Gaza and in Lebanon, and understand that there are bombs that are capable of hitting bunkers no matter how deep they are. However, Iran is a bit less than 1.5 million square kilometers. Israel and the United States cannot destroy all of Iran capability in 24, 48, 72 hours. The American bases around the Middle East, and there are many, will be subject to an Iranian bombardment. The Americans understood in the last bombing of Iran to Israel that Iran has the capability of creating serious damage on any US military base. But not only during that last bombardment, but even before in 2020, when Haj Qasem Soleimani was assassinated along with Abu Mahdi Mohandes, Iran launched 16 missiles, and the US chief of staff at that time said, without prior warning, that we've seen the preparation, because when you deploy a liquid fuel missile, you need 5 minutes, but when you deploy sorry, when you deploy solid fuel missile, there is a need of a few minutes to deploy and fire the missile, but the liquid fuel missile needs at least half an hour to several hours. Therefore, it's easy for the satellite to spot the preparation and to understand that Iran was prepared to launch an attack against the Americans and later on the Israelis on the first hit, but not on the second hit, because the second hit was a solid fuel missile and hypersonic missile. So by Iran launching 200 missiles in 3 or 4 corridors only, it was incapable for the Israelis and the American interception missiles. The one we're talking about, the THAADs, we're talking about the Arrow 1 and 2, the one that covered outside the atmospheric pressure, and we're talking about the Iron Dome and all the other interception missiles inside the atmospheric pressure. Both failed to intercept the 100 Iranian missiles. Therefore, the Americans will not be able to intercept the Iranian missiles in case of war against Iran. But I don't see there is a reason for a war at the moment. The Americans are happy to continue increasing sanctions. The last thing I heard from Donald Trump is to impose sanctions on selling oil. And by imposing sanctions on selling oil, with Russia back to the international arena selling its oil without sanctions, then yes, the Americans can tighten the grip on Iran. And Iran will have to sell to China, for example, that is not abiding by the sanction, to Turkey, that is not abiding by the sanction, and to try to see if it can smuggle the selling of oil. But it will be more painful for Iran with Russia back to the selling of oil without sanctions. At the moment, there are American and European sanctions, and India is still buying. If India buys of Iran or of Russia, we don't know how the the balance, the geopolitical balance will be in the future. But I think the Americans can show their force with a B-2 or B-12 or whatever bombs they want to, or plane or strategic jets that carry tons of explosive, but they will not use it because there is no need to. There's no need to go to war with Iran. There is a need to put more pressure on Iran with obtaining a zero result because Iran doesn't work and doesn't function according to pressure.
That's fantastic. I just want to get a final point from you. You said Russia is going to basically be brought back to the good books. Iran and Russia have just signed a deal together, and that deal, I would assume, is a deal that would sort of, they've given them permission to build the Su-35s. They've given them the Su-57s. They're giving them the planes that they use to train pilots in that. They've given them the permission to rebuild the S-400s, I think, or the, am I right in saying that? Now, this is a military alliance. And on top of that, Iran is now a full-fledged member of BRICS. Is Iran going to be suffering the consequences of sanctions as badly as you're suggesting right now? Is it going to be as bad for them? Because they are part of a worldwide organization which is actually bigger than the American economy right now, and the markets of India, China, Brazil, all of the BRICS out, they're much bigger than the rest of the whatever the West has got to offer. Is Iran going to really suffer the consequences of more sanctions? And is it going to be as powerful as you were suggesting a second ago?
The BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation do not represent an alternative for the open market. Therefore, if Iran cannot sell its oil, it's going to be difficult for Iran to have the regular income it has today, in particular if the Americans stop the tap of gas from coming to Iraq, because this is what the Americans are trying to do. And they told the Iraqis to find another source, and the Iraqis, with the approach of the summer, are finding it difficult to cope without the Iranian gas and cannot find an alternative, even though they're trying through the Arabs and through Jordan and to the Emirates and Saudi Arabia. Therefore, being part of the BRICS doesn't mean that the BRICS is going to solve the problem, because at the end of the day, the BRICS is not made of countries against the US. It's made of countries who support the US, who are with the US, but who are finding alternative in case they are under sanctions, or open up market of the global south to one another. Of course, they have agreed to use local currency in part because they all need foreign currency. Or dethroning the dollar, excluding the Western market, BRICS is not at that stage yet. Now, you've mentioned all the military support that Russia has agreed to give to Iran. They have signed a deal. Well, none of the two countries will join the enemy of one of the two countries in case of war, but they did not sign a deal of
Okay.
defense and cooperation at this level. Secondly, the Russians have delayed in the past selling of many weapons bought by Iran, paid by Iran, even the nuclear facilities and nuclear reactors. So if the Russians, and they are going to make a deal with the Americans in the next few months, stop the war in Ukraine, open up to America again, which is something that Russia is badly in need of, but it doesn't mean that Russia did not learn the lesson that in 4 years, with another president replacing Donald Trump and different ideas, things can go back to the same problem in Ukraine and most probably Georgia. Therefore, Russia will keep its options open, but will not rush to arm Iran when the Americans are giving a gift to Russia by bringing Ukraine on its knee begging for a ceasefire, and then saying, well, you can go ahead and deliver Iran the weapon that can threaten the US presence in the Gulf and the Israeli security. So I think the Russians are capable of slowing down or putting conditions on the use of weapons, etc. Then, if you sell jets, then you need spare parts, and this is where Iran needs to start reinventing everything again and rely on itself. So the situation is not that easy for Iran in the future, but doesn't mean Iran is going to surrender. And it doesn't mean Iran is going to be surrounded and brought to its knees. Because when the Grand Ayatollah Said Ali Khamenei said no to talk to America, he's relying not only on the oil, he's relying on so many other resources. This is why Iran has so many resources, a vast territory, and can survive as it has survived since 1979 with the first sanction pronounced by um, Jimmy Carter, the first US president.
Mm.
And until since then, until today, every single president increases the sanctions. Therefore, Iran will continue surviving.
Elijah, I am so grateful to you for your time. I've taken up an hour of your life, and I think a lot of people have learned a lot of things. So with that, my thanks. I'm going to stop this. If you can stay online for a second for me, I'd be grateful. Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Right, if you just stay on for 1 second, it's